Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the study of antiquity and the Middle Ages. As always, I'm your host, Nick Barksdale, and today we're joined once again by a very special guest. You loved his last presentation, and I know you are going to love this one. We're joined by none other than Alexander Iles. Alexander, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Great to be here again. Thanks again.
And not only do we have a special guest on this show, which is Alexander, who's going to take us on this travel tour of history, but he's actually going to be interviewing another expert. And so we actually have two guests on this channel today. And to my subscribers, check out the links in the video description below to give both of them your full support, from the castle itself and the very people who run it to our awesome history friend who made this happen. And so without further ado, Alex, can you tell us a little bit about the guests that we're going to have on our show today?
So David is one of the best storytellers I've come across. In fact, one of his jobs that he regularly does is he goes out and he does storytelling events. He is incredibly knowledgeable in history, and he knows from prehistory right the way through into the Middle Ages, and his passion for it just comes through. As a part of his role at the castle, he does educational sessions with schools, and he also works throughout the region as well as a freelancer doing educational workshops and storytelling. So I thought that working with David, who's obviously the education officer at the castle, would be great for this video because he knows the castle inside out. He's someone who can tell us the stories, he can get us to understand the castle as a living building and not just cold, hard stones. That's so often when you interact with buildings, especially within Europe, many of our older sites are ruins. That's what you see. But Newcastle's castle is incredibly fortunate in the fact that it survived, it's been refurbished, and it is still a living, breathing building in the core of the city. That means that we can interact with it today and get a sense of what the Middle Ages and the people who lived in around it in the Middle Ages, what would have been like for them. And so that's why I thought David was the best person to speak to in this for this video.
And for our subscribers today, would you tell us what we are about to see? Where are you taking us today?
So we're going to be visiting a 12th century medieval castle in Newcastle upon Tyne. So Newcastle, as you can guess from the name, has a castle in the centre. And originally, when the Normans invaded, they built a wooden castle. That castle lasts for between 60 to 80 years. We're not entirely sure how long, and then probably burns to the ground. It doesn't seem like it's a violent attack. What it seems like is someone's left a candle unattended or a fire unattended, and the castle, being made of wood, goes up. When it burns to the ground, then you come into the reign of King Henry II, who is an amazingly energetic monarch. And he comes in, very young man. He's got something to prove, and the country is in desolation. It's just come out of a brutal civil war between this two different factions. Once it's come out of this brutal civil war, it's then reunited again under Henry. And Henry starts a major process of fortifying and building around his whole kingdom. And as a part of that, he builds Newcastle's castle, which is a very well fortified and expensive castle when it's built. It cost a full £900, which today sounds like a bit of a joke when you realize modern currency, but £900 back then is a substantial amount of currency to be used to build a castle. So he builds the castle, and then that gives the town that grows around it its name. So it's the Newcastle on the site, and that's why we have Newcastle upon Tyne in the northeast of England. Hello to the followers and friends of the study of antiquities in the Middle Ages. My name is Alex Iles, and welcome to Newcastle's castle. We're currently standing in one of the solars, or one of the bedrooms in the castle. And right here I'm standing with David Silk, who is the education officer here at the castle. And it's just brilliant to be with you today, David, and just to ask you some questions. But just to start off with, what's it like actually working inside a castle?
I mean, I'd be lying if I'd said that it wasn't brilliant. I really enjoy it. It's a bit of a dream job, really. I'm from Newcastle. I was born and grew up here, except for a brief stint in Glasgow, but we won't talk about that. Being able to work in Newcastle's very own castle, the Keep and the Black Gate, is just absolutely brilliant. I really love it.
Fantastic. And with that as well, what's your actual favourite part of the history of the castle? Because obviously this is a 12th century building. It's got an amazing amount of history and history underneath our feet as well, which, you know, isn't so easy to see. So you've got so much to choose from. But what's your favourite part?
Well, yeah, like you say, there's a lot of it here. You know, this goes back. It's built on top of a Roman fort, which was part of Hadrian's Wall. There's an Anglo-Saxon cemetery underneath us. The remains somewhere, although not very visible, as you say, of a Norman timber castle, and then the stone castle that we're in. I think, on the whole, actually, my favourite historical story from the castle, and there are a lot of them. You know, we've got actual evil sheriffs. You know, lots of kings and other such goings on. But my favourite story, I think, comes from the 1700s. And in 1733, this place was an absolute wreck by then, the Castle Keep. The roof had fallen in, and the whole area around it was built up with a sort of shanty town, a kind of real slum in Newcastle. And from all the sources, it sounds like a pretty exciting place to live. But the entertainment is a little bit unusual. Because in 1733, a guy who described his job as flying man flew from the roof of the keep down to the ground in front of the audience, but then surprised them with something a little bit different because he tried to fly a donkey from the roof of the castle keep down into the crowd. For those who aren't as familiar with flying men as a career, it's a bit of an unusual one nowadays, I think. It's a bit like an acrobat, I suppose. They were often sailors, and they basically used to run a rope between a high spot on the ground, and then they would fly on that rope down to the ground. It's a bit like a zip line, I suppose, but done at great speed and without any health and safety concerns at all, really. So he got this donkey up to the roof of the keep, climbing up, 130 odd stairs, and then contrived to attach it to this with some kind of harness, presumably, to this rope, and then flung it off the roof and sent it kind of hurtling down into the crowds with lead weights tied to its feet to stop its legs from flailing around. And it, of course, predictably crashed into the crowd. It actually killed one person, injured a number of other people who were there. And there's a newspaper report about it from the Courant, Newcastle's local newspaper at the time. And it says very pragmatically, it says obviously it was the fault of the crowd because they didn't get out of the way of the donkey flying from the roof. Because, why wouldn't you expect a donkey to come hurtling from the roof of your nearby castle, really?
Exactly. Obviously, it just shows you again, that story, it just shows you how much our world's changed. Just basic rights of animals as such, that's just in its own way, shows you our world and how it's transformed. And it's those stories as well that I think are brilliant, especially within like a situation like a castle like this. Alongside that as well, when you come to the castle and you look at the building itself, is there a specific part of the castle that you really like over any others, or is it just that you love all of the castle in its entirety?
I mean, it's got a lot of great features to explore. The Black Gate, which was the gatehouse of the castle. It's just a really kind of fascinating, ramshackle-looking building. It's been built on top of so many times. There's this kind of brick structures kind of built on top of the medieval gatehouse in the Georgian and Victorian periods, which gives it this great kind of Gothic appearance. You've got the Heron Pit, the old dungeon, the actual jail of the castle. Down behind there. In the keep, I think, the Great Hall is a magnificent space. It's got an unfinished staircase. It's the chapel, absolutely beautiful example of Norman stone carving. Yeah. But I think, weirdly, my favourite bit in the keep is the plumbing. It has lead pipes running through the walls, and one of which sticks out in the basement. There's one just sticking out of a stone pillar, and I just love that little reminder of how kind of inventive and clever the builders of this structure really were, and how this ruin, I mean, it is, it's pretty intact compared to most keeps in the country, but it is still a ruin. Just how fantastically high status this building must have been when it was built,
Yeah, and the investment as well, when you've got to think of the man hours, the time, and I think, if I'm correct, it took 10 years to build the castle.
Yeah, with a Scottish invasion to interrupt it.
Yeah.
That must have set the building back a little way, I think. But yeah, 10 years, 1168 to 1178, and I think the total investment is somewhere around £900 for the keep.
Yeah.
Doesn't sound like a lot nowadays, but yeah, it was in the 1100s, I think.
Yeah, huge sum of money. Now, my last question, and this is a bit of a fun one, but if you had like unlimited resources and you could put on any event you wanted or make any change you wanted to the castle, what would you actually do?
Well, it would sound mean-spirited of me to say that I would like demolish the railway line, but really I think it's one of the more one of the strange features of the castle really is that you've got this railway line running in between the two main buildings. So whereas most castles out in the English countryside are sort of quite undisturbed, even if they have fallen into ruin, you know, here we do have a railway viaduct running literally right through the middle of where the castle grounds would have been. I think if I had unlimited resources, I wouldn't knock that down. I might have said that a few years ago when I started work here. But I might be tempted to build some kind of new visitors centre in one of the railway arches. There used to be shops in there in the Victorian period and a little bit later, and warehouses. And I think something built into there would allow us to free up a bit more space in the Black Gate and do some really exciting stuff in there. So, and yeah, I would love to see something like that happen. So, but we'll keep the railway line. It's a feature rather than a bug now, I think.
Yeah, it would help us to get from London to Edinburgh pretty fast.
Well,
so
that's also
good.
true. Yeah, I suppose I can't begrudge people fast travel. So.
Well, thank you so much again, David, for the fact that we can come here, chat to you and ask you questions about Newcastle's castle and basically just show an element of this history of this amazing medieval building that's transformed so much. And I really hope that our followers and friends have really enjoyed this and will join us again for another video soon. Until then, stay well and stay safe. And thank you very much for tuning in.
And for our audience today, as you're standing there surrounded by history, surrounded by the echoes of time, what was it like to actually be there on the outside and in the very heart of this monument to history?
For me, it's quite interesting because as I work as a tour guide, I take people on tours and take them inside the castle and show them around. So I'm much more familiar with it. But when I was filming, it's good for me to always remind myself that other people don't have that same connection to a building or don't have the same connection to the historical sites that I get to do as a part of my daily work. So when I was in the room with David, we were in one of the solars, which is a bedroom. And when you're inside the solar, this was the sheriff of Northumberland's bedroom. So this is a guy who is involved in law and order, taxation, protecting the area, a very, very prestigious gentleman. And he was, directly answerable to the monarch. So when you've got someone who's answerable to a king, that room has seen a lot of talk, and especially with the Anglo-Scottish wars, where for a good 300 years officially, you've got constant conflict between both sides of the border. That room has heard some very interesting conversations. And while the room itself doesn't look as if it has anything particularly special about it, you kind of wish you could hear the stones talking. And, those conversations where particular sheriffs will have sat there and gone, right, how are we going to do this, guys? What are we going to do today? This is occurring. The area is hotting up, or, there's a Scottish army approaching Newcastle. For instance, Newcastle Castle was besieged by the absolutely brutal, horrendous warlord, William Wallace. Hear that, Americans. He's not as nice as he's depicted in the films. But Newcastle was having William Wallace barreling down on the city. And so the sheriff would have had to decide to the city town, how it's going to respond to it, and where he's going to deploy troops to deal with this guy who just seems unbeatable. Funnily enough, Wallace's siege was broken and Newcastle was spared, but it was touch and go at times. So that room will have heard some amazing stories. And again, just to hear those bricks speak would have been amazing.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for another awesome and exciting history tour to where Alexander brings history to you. And a special thanks to David Silk, whose phenomenal storytelling made this episode even more delightful, and especially with that horrifying story about a donkey. Don't forget to check out the links in the video description below, where it's going to take you to all of the awesome work that Alexander is doing. But more importantly, also, it's going to take you to the castle itself, to all of the awesome work the staff is doing to help keep history alive for people like me and you. And it's our job to help them make history matter. Whether it's in the form of subscribing to what they do, following their work, or even possibly participating monetarily. Whatever you choose to do, let's just do what we can to help. And so, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so much. And Alexander, thank you for coming on the show today.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.